There's this big disconnect in what retailers are doing and the data they're using to open up stores and understand why theft is happening and where it's coming from. I think that's when we can really start to tackle these challenges by understanding where your inventory is. And I always come back to inventory management, but I think this is part of the solution, is having that visibility, that traceability in real time.
The food inflation rate is dropping, making management much more predictable. You can afford to plan and offer promotions more so than just 12 months ago. So we are expecting more promotions, more aggressive promotions, more loss leading as well, which is something we are seeing, but not as much as, say, pre-COVID.
I think it's going to be an interesting next 6 months. We've kind of talked about how the economy might formally soften. We might see the actual R word, whether it's the R word or whether it's a setback. So I think back to school will be interesting, at least on the hardline side and the soft goods side. Back to school will be an interesting barometer over the next few weeks in terms of how retailers come out with pricing.
We have to do something differently, but they have got this excess stock that everyone's very quiet about. And that excess stock has hidden the fact that we can and continue to make pretty poor decisions around merchandise, about assortment planning, about some of our stores, whether it should be in the network or not, what decisions we need to make around e-commerce. I just hope that some retailers will perhaps do something different and show other retailers there is a different way that we can do this. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newbury. I'm an award-winning strategic advisor and delivery executive. I'm focused on the rapid transformation of disrupted supply chain performance across the make, move, sell flow of consumer products and services from production to porch and assembly floor to shelf. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt, and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available from my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check these out. As the business world faces significant volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, business leaders looking to drive market-leading performance need to be tapping into thought leaders, strategic advisors, and implementation executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations, together with a strong track record of transitioning enterprises to become more agile, innovative, and digital. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the RetailAID podcast series, looking at Retail Conversation 2020s. I've got some excellent guests today. They've all appeared weirdly on the television and regularly sometimes. So I've got Bruce Winder, Lisa Mlani, and Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. These are people you're going to be seeing on TV, CP24, and all the other channels that I don't see. So can I ask Bruce to give us a quick one-line of himself and hand over to Sylvain and then Lisa, and then I'll set off the departure point for today's discussion.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Gary. So hi, I'm Bruce Winder. I worked in big retail for about 22 years at places like Canadian Tire, Sears, and Zellers. And then I did some consulting, some freelancing, and now I kind of a bit of a jack of all trades. I do some teaching, I do some consulting. I wrote a book a few years ago. And I really love the industry, so I like to stay current on it. Thank you.
Sylvain?
So I'm Sylvain Charlebois, Director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. We have a team of about 15 people here working in the lab, and we look at issues affecting both ends of the food continuum, really, including retail, of course. I also have a podcast produced by Michael LeBlanc in Toronto, and the podcast is called The Food Professor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Mlani. And like you, Bruce, I also come from industry, about 22 years, similar. And I have a retail consulting firm called Retail Strategy Group. I also have a media channel called The Merchant Life. My background is really about really deep into merchandising and product creation in the apparel, accessories, and footwear space.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. And do tune into the Food Professor podcast series. So I'm going to kick off with the departure point for this edition. We're going to be talking about the change in unit and transportation costs for retailers experienced over the last 2 or 3 years. So during the pandemic, retailers experienced many disruptions. These disruptions to inventory availability directly affected business performance. The cost of transportation saw significant unit increases, often tenfold. And often retailers passed on such costs and found they needed to run less promotions as inventories remained scarce. As we emerge from a pandemic, consumers have increasingly suffered from accelerating inflation, especially in essential categories like food, health, and energy, an upward trend with interest rates. As consumers continue to adapt, capacity is becoming better balanced and transportation costs reducing to almost their pre-pandemic levels. However, storage costs, especially for excess inventory, remain at challenging levels. A year on from the restrictions and with less than 6 months of 2023 left, how do we think retailers will treat reducing unit costs in terms of their shelf prices? So I'm going to ask Bruce to lead off on that to get this conversation going.
Gary, that's a great question, and it's something I think all of us have thought about as we look in the future is what's going to happen as the unit costs change. One would think that in some cases you might see retailers probably get a little more aggressive on promotions, I would imagine, overall, because they're landing at a point now where we all know that there's a potential recession. We've been saying recession for a long time, but a lot of folks are seeing something happening sort of second half of this year. And, you know, when you look at everything from interest rates, as you mentioned, and you look at inflation, which has come down, but it's still higher than target, job losses, things like that, I think you're going to see some of that put back into promotions versus pure margin rate. It's obviously going to vary a lot by category and by retailer and by customer segment. In the luxury space, I don't think much in the way of promotions. So you'll probably see greater margins, I would imagine, in those retailers. But the folks who fight at the mid and low, you're probably going to see a bit more of that, because if things were great, they might keep it in margin, but I think they're going to have to pass some of that decrease on. And I know I read somewhere that Walmart was hunting hard in the US and Canada, I assume, going after vendors saying, okay, you know what, you had your fun for a couple of years when costs were up. Now that costs are coming down, give us the reduction now so we can pass some of it on the consumer.
Thank you, Bruce. I think great points. Obviously, I only look at food retailing, and financial results that were released by Empire Sobeys are telling really the story that's happening right now. I mean, food sales have dropped year to year. If you actually look at results, Sobeys is actually not necessarily selling less food, but probably less expensive food. And during the call, Michael Medland talked about converting many stores into discount stores. The focus is going to be on private labels as well. We are clearly seeing a much more frugal marketplace. Consumers are trading down. Even StatsCan is giving us the same picture. Loblaws, during Q1, food sales are up 3.1%, despite food inflation being at over 9% steadily. And so you can see that really grocers are treading water with food sales. They're making money selling other things. But when it comes to food, consumers are clearly impacted by what's happening with interest rates. Shelter costs are going up for most households. And trading down with shelter is much more difficult than trading down with food. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So to Bruce's point, more promotions. The food inflation rate is dropping, making management much more predictable. You can afford to plan and offer promotions more so than just 12 months ago. So we are expecting more promotions, more aggressive promotions, more loss leading as well, which is something we are seeing, but not as much as, say, pre-COVID. So that's kind of the landscape that we're expecting over the next 12 months.
What I'm hearing here is very similar to what I hear from market leaders across the board, grocery included, is that the challenge that most retailers and brands are facing is the challenge around inventory management. And the fact is, and I preach about this, is that we are creating a product, assorting product in the same way. We're buying the same amount. We are overproducing. as an industry, and we always have. Unless we change the way we go to market, we're going to continue to have inventory management challenges and contingency plans like band-aids, like SKU rationalization and all these things that happen every single season. These are still going to continue to fuel the retail industry with these types of challenges, which are rooted in inventory management. Now, in terms of what I'm seeing in promotions, there is excessive promotional activity happening because brands and multi-brand retailers are looking to get rid of this excess inventory. And then they will continue this cycle because it's a band-aid, right? If we're not buying less and we're not buying the right product at the right time or leveraging data around understanding what the consumer actually wants to buy and at what price, we're never going to change the way we go to market. We're always going to have these inventory management issues, which are going to drive increased promotion. I am talking to quite a few brands today, brand leaders, and they do want to change the narrative. They want to buy less, but the fact is they don't know how. We're going to market in the same way, creating product in the same way, using the same type of assortment planning tools that we always have, that don't include things like predictive analytics or leveraging insights at the right time or, capturing market feedback at the right time. And all of this is driving prices. Raw material costs have not come down. So even though supply chain chaos may be a little bit less than it was a few years ago, the fact is we're still dealing with the same types of challenges, whether or not we're paying better pricing for raw materials or not, right? We're still doing the same thing over and over again.
I think for me, we have to do something differently, but they have got this excess stock that everyone's very quiet about. And that excess stock has hidden the fact that we can and continue to make pretty poor decisions around merchandise, about assortment planning, about some of our stores, whether it should be in the network or not, what decisions we need to make around e-commerce. I just hope that some retailers will perhaps do something different and show other retailers there is a different way that we can do this. The whole idea of putting together assortment plans with markdowns already deeply embedded in the open to buy and all the mechanisms around putting that together, the budgets effectively, suggests that there's a clear problem in how we source, the quantities we source, where we source from. One of the factors that we seem to have been doing recently is switching our sourcing strategy from, say, primarily China to other parts very close to China, like Vietnam and Indonesia. We still have 3 months travel distance, assuming there's no disruption. So we're in a situation that we're still guessing what that customer might need in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time. And we have to perhaps start thinking about not just fast sourcing, whatever that sourcing strategy might be, but actually bringing things back to the local market so we can actually go back to what we used to do, which was bring in a couple of pallets, spread it around the network. Does it sell? Does it need a color change or something like that? And get a trailer load and then spread it out and convert it quickly into cash and have less risk of being stuck with inventory we have to discount or send to landfill.
If you look at how Zara manages, and I'm sure others have sort of copied Zara in terms of having a little bit of product made locally and seeing how it does in a few stores and just making a little bit and sort of riding the trend up. So Zara sort of turned the supply chain upside down, where they buy smaller quantities from local suppliers and they can ramp up quicker to trends and they can ramp down quicker when something's cold, and it's saved them a ton of markdown money as well. And I know that someone like Shein has a very interesting business model as well in terms of using analytics to look at what's selling, what people are clicking on, and basically in real time informing production quantities so that they're not stuck with a lot of inventory, and then they can ride it out. So Lisa knows a lot more about this than I do, but the clothing industry, at least in some parts, has become very smart in terms of riding that curve up and down, Gary, like you mentioned.
Bruce, exactly what I was going to talk about is that these ultra fast fashion brands are able to leverage what the consumer actually wants and building on that as they're testing the product while they're also in production. Their production days, like Shein, Inditex, if you think about it, has so many brands, right? So we're looking at 30 days or less, going from concept, so design, all the way to production. Unheard of. Unheard of. And now you have Temu in the mix, right? Which is getting product to the customer super fast, but also, I mean, there's a lot of challenges from an ethical standpoint on these ultra fast fashion brands and how much product they're creating. And that's the challenge that we have with Shein, right? Is that they have thousands and thousands and thousands of SKUs. Back in the day when I was working in London, in the UK, and I was managing Ralph Lauren there, we would get a lot of slack for ordering ASOS into the office. If you think about how many SKUs ASOS was producing at that time, and how customers are fueling that, looking at what it is today with Shein and Temu is just mind-blowing. But what we can do is brands and retailers can actually learn from how fast these brands are getting to market, how they're leveraging the voice of the consumer in order to create right product at the right time, and then allocating that product accordingly to where that customer is. This is something we can also learn from Amazon, right? They're a tech company, if you think about it, where they have in their distribution centers, they learn from where the consumer is buying product and they allocate that product accordingly. This is exactly what brands and retailers should be doing. And I will tell you that most brands and multi-brand retailers are not revisiting their hierarchies of stores and their allocations. So I think that there's a lot to learn here, but it does all come back to how are we managing our inventory from sourcing all the way to end consumer.
So is there something that you think that retailers can learn, to Gary's point and Lisa's point about this, that we can borrow from the food industry that has to manage perishable product, low margin product, international sourcing sometimes? What best practices could we learn?
Well, Bruce, the food industry is more traditional than you think. It's quite traditional. It's a lagging industry when it comes to embracing new technologies. Lisa talked about predictive analytics. They're being pushed right now to look into the just-in-case model. They're pushed to consider the use of more AI. We use AI. We've been using AI for 15 years at the lab here to forecast. And I have to tell you, it hasn't been part of best practices in the food industry, generally speaking. The food industry is very much about traditions, about gut feel. I think it's like that in other retail sectors, but in food, it's, I mean, traditions are valued, cultures are valued. They don't want to compromise any of that. So they're very scared of changing their image and things like that. What I'm seeing right now, what I'm hearing too is a reduction in a number of SKUs. As you probably know, there's more consolidation in food because of low margins, because of this pursuit for more volume. And so processors in North America, particularly in the US, are essentially not bullying, but pushing grocers here in Canada to get more shelf space because they just acquired a division of some sort. And they're pushing away some Canadian products because Canadian products don't offer the same kind of margins. And grocers are really desperate to increase margins right now. I'm not saying they don't care whether or not the product is local or Canadian, but they are absolutely looking at margins. And if they can actually allocate more SKUs to a multinational to increase margins, they will do it. I've actually spoken to 2 companies in the last 2 weeks that have been delisted by a major grocer. I won't tell you which one, but they were delisted by a major grocer, and those 2 companies are Canadian companies, SMEs, and now they're being delisted in 6 weeks from now.
That is awful. And the one thing I will say, Bruce, that I really like that you said, I think that all these verticals can learn from each other, right? Within soft goods, we can learn from hard goods, right? And we can also learn from grocery in terms of the longevity of brands and how loyal customers are to certain brands, right?
I think you're absolutely right, Lisa. I've been banging on that drum for years, saying to the food industry, you should learn from other verticals, other sectors. And there is this reluctance. It's often said, and I suspect you guys are hearing the same thing in your fields. Food is different. Food is
Yeah.
unique. We
Yeah.
can't really learn from other sectors.
One thing that I've heard a lot about, I'm sure you guys have, and it does affect inventory, is shrink, theft, not just in hard lines, but everywhere, including food. Everything from organized crime to people coming in and helping themselves during self-checkout processes. And it's starting to hit a tipping point, I think, where retailers are starting to give it another look and see what they can do to try to improve this. And you got to think it has a lot to do with the economy, I would think.
I would say that loss prevention is a huge deal in the food sector for sure. And as you mentioned, Bruce, there's organized crime and there's theft motivated by desperation, and that's another issue. But organized crime is clearly a problem. I mean, we've seen a few cases where groups have actually stolen for thousands and thousands of dollars worth of food. And we actually estimated, I think it was last year, that the average grocery store gets stolen for about $5,000 worth of food a week. That adds up over time. And so with small margins, it matters. And that's why you're starting to see, companies like Loblaws starting to check receipts. I'm not sure it's the right approach, but more and more companies are looking at different ways to discourage theft. And some approaches are really good, while others are a work in progress.
We had Lululemon sacking a couple of people who actually, tried to muscle into somebody who was stealing some of their product, and the management have fought with no choice but to sack them because they broke the policy. I've heard of many retailers saying, if you see this going on, just stand back, because it could affect you, could affect customers as well. Just let them get on with it. But the retailers definitely have to have another real good look at this. And even if they're scanning on CCTVs and hoping to find these people later, it's not really reassuring for the staff to actually stand aside, or for customers to, potentially be in a difficult situation. So I think that situation is going to get much worse, especially when we find ourselves finally in some correction, let's call it, whether or not it becomes a recession or is just a very sharp correction. A lot of people find themselves in very different circumstances very quickly.
Yeah, but we're not in a recession right now, because you just go to an airport, you'll notice that we're not in a recession. Lots of people are traveling, but you're right, Gary. I think there's going to be a bit of a wall in the fall. The Bank of Canada is thinking of raising rates again in July, so that's going to hurt a lot of people, and it's probably going to impact behavior for sure in the marketplace, including at the grocery store.
If anyone reads the Business of Fashion, there was an article on retail theft, and then of course, the news has been just infiltrated with retail theft. I think it was the 38% increase in retail theft, according to the National Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research. This is out of the US. Now, of course, the US is a little bit different than Canada. We know that. But I think that the trend is still there. We're seeing it in the UK as well. I think that it's important for brands to start thinking about increasing the use of things like RFID. Let's monitor where is the theft happening, so that we can either train employees, increase security, but also if you increase the level of customer experience, the delight, these are things that are going to help push some of that theft out the door instead of, the other way around. So I think that there are options that retailers have. It's just understanding through data, where is the theft happening? Is it in a certain area or certain store? We all know what's happening in San Francisco today, but yet Chanel opened a store there. So, there's this big disconnect in what retailers are doing and the data they're using to open up stores and understand why theft is happening and where it's coming from. I think that's when we can really start to tackle these challenges, but by understanding where your inventory is. And I always come back to inventory management, but I think this is part of the solution, is having that visibility, that traceability in real time. That's what we need.
One of the things that'll be interesting, and it's kind of a food thing, but it obviously kind of translates to a lot of places, is the development of autonomous vehicles in transportation. Loblaw is currently using autonomous trucks to move product between warehouses.
To cover the middle mile.
Middle
Absolutely.
mile, yeah, yeah. I thought
They
that
have
was interesting.
they have a partnership with Gatic. Yes,
Okay, okay. And I think, you know, at what point will that become more ubiquitous with other retailers and other verticals? You know, and how does that affect costs? Because
well,
obviously you don't have drivers, right?
you know, your comment really, absolutely, it's bang on, because I actually think, so we all know that the last mile is the most costly, and I think grocers are starting to realize that the money is actually in the middle mile. How you actually make money is really by managing that middle mile. That's why Loblaws, it's funny because Loblaws is probably a lagging player when it comes to e-commerce in the food industry, generally speaking. They've never been good at it. They've never committed to it, like really. They're still married to the click and collect. Whereas Sobeys, they have Voila, they have warehouses. Metro has built a new warehouse in Montreal as well. So, but Loblaws is still not committed too much. But the middle mile, I would say that Loblaws is ahead because of that partnership with Gatic, and they can actually increase the efficiency of their own supply chain by doing that. And obviously, Loblaws has a huge fleet of trucks. They move a lot of products. In e-commerce, for example, in the food industry, before COVID, about 1.7% of food was sold online. Now we're up to about 3.4%. And in Ontario, Ontario is the most connected market right now in Canada at 4.2%. Those numbers are pretty significant for food, to be honest. We weren't expecting such a change in such a short period of time, but we are expecting that number to continue to go up because grocers are getting better at it. And Loblaws is going to be the big factor. They're the leading grocer in Canada. They're not good at e-commerce, but we are expecting Loblaws to get better at it, and that number will continue to climb.
What do we think about areas such as these pricing models? People are saying AI is going to help with real-time pricing models with a view to perhaps not missing sales because our prices are too high at that time in the day, in the week, wherever it is, but to be able to modify those to actually be able to optimize our, let's call it short-term profitability, and make sure that our stock actually moves rather than see no movement, and also in a big chunk of movement because we've done a 70% off, which isn't good for the brand.
It wouldn't be nice if a grocer knew that someone is going to become a vegan before that person knows it, his or herself, or how it would be nice for someone or a company to know when a brand will be dropped by someone before that person knows. I mean, that's what AI does. It provides a clear picture of the future before it happens. And I think it's going to be valuable. I don't know about other sectors, but I can tell you that the weather is amazingly influential when it comes to food purchases on an hourly basis. You can actually have a lucrative Friday night in store, and all of a sudden it rains and people just shift, and they'll, instead of buying stuff for the barbecue, they'll buy something else to put in the oven. Or, I mean, food retailing is unbelievably vulnerable to factors you can't control, really, that impact people by the minute. And that's why I think that dynamic pricing is going to become a norm very soon. You have Avril in Montreal, they're already doing it. You walk in, everything's digital, and they do change prices depending of inventory, depending of the weather, depending of how much volume is going out the door and things like that. So we are, and that of course dynamic pricing will impact demand as well in real time. So that tango is just, we're just at the beginning of this tango session between a consumer and grocers, I think. And that is going to be really pushed by AI, or the use of AI, over the long term.
I've been on a few podcasts and webinars around generative AI and how it's being used in fashion and retail today. And I think that there are a lot more uses than we think. And when it comes down to pricing, when we think about pricing from a B2B standpoint, so, you know, Walmart had announced recently that they are using an AI platform in order to negotiate with their suppliers. So that's one way that they're using generative AI solutions. There's also the fact that if you think about it from a customer standpoint, that they're always shopping around. So from a retailer standpoint, if we do the same by optimizing pricing using a technology like AI or generative AI to understand how consumers are shopping for certain types of product and pricing them accordingly, and then also working backwards to work on your forecast and plan and then negotiate with your suppliers, it's all connected. And when we optimize pricing, me as a former merchant of 20 years, I'll tell you that, the way that we did it was we would shop around ourselves and physically go into stores and see what our competitors were doing, and then make sure that we were pricing accordingly based on what we were seeing in the market, and of course, what our first costs, et cetera, and our gross margin plans would be. The fact is we have these tools to do it now in a matter of seconds with an abundance of data. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. I also think that brands and retailers need to take a hold of that opportunity because consumers are fickle and they have more choices than ever. And they are not as loyal as they were to any brand, whether it is grocery, apparel, footwear, accessories, or hard goods. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity here for brands and retailers to do a lot better. And there's so many solutions out there. So I think, just implementing that solution and just getting it done, I think that's what they need to do.
I'm learning quite a bit from Bruce and Lisa because they're
Me
talking
too.
about they're talking about a world that I don't know much about. So it's great. I do believe that that what we're going through right now is quite revolutionary for the food industry. And I'll give you one example, one project what we worked on with the app Skip. They called us, I think it was in January or February, to develop this tool called the Inflation Cookbook. If you actually go on your phone right now, you can actually just look up Inflation Cookbook, and you'll just put your address in and the number of people in your household and your weekly budget for food, and it will instantly tell you exactly what 10 food ingredients are cheaper this week and what's more expensive this week. They're generic, no brands, no stores, like broccoli up 10%, cauliflower up 15%, hot dogs -5. So you have a top 10 for cheaper, top 10 for more expensive. And then you click again, and the AI model, it's all generated by AI. It will give you 7 recipes using the cheapest ingredients that week in your neighborhood. And so this is what the future looks like. You'll have a lot of tools influencing the behavior of people or the intel that people have in their minds as they walk into the grocery store. And of course, it was developed by Skip. So you can order, obviously, products from Skip once you're done looking at all recipes. And the photo, the picture that you see right next to the recipe is AI generated as well. So it's really cool. It's getting more popular, but my guess is that there's going to be way more tools like that in a very near future, helping consumers save as much money as possible.
I just love that. I needed to pipe in right away because I see this in the fashion world where, you have an event, you have a budget, you know what you want to look like, right? You can use this in the fashion world as well. Now we are seeing a lot more use cases and things that are coming to life using AI and generative AI around product creation and product design, which I think that this is where we can really focus on getting the right product to the right customer at the right time. This is the whole thing that we're trying to solve around managing inventory, getting the right product out there, but also reducing that excess and the product that the customer doesn't want. This is what we need to highlight. I think that, Gary, you said this when we first started, that we're not always seeing what's really happening in inventory situations with brands, but we know that when we go into their P&L, as folks that work with retailers and brands, that when we look at their excess inventory, we look at their aged inventory, how much product they're creating, how much waste, how many times the assortment is changing. These are all indications that they don't know what the customer wants, right? So how do we solve that? Well, we need to start using technology in the right way, but we also need to upskill. We need to change ways of working. We need to innovate processes These are things that will help us change the way we go to market.
And have a very clear vision or proposition or go-to-market strategy that says this is the type of problems that we're solving for these specific segments we want to serve in the longer term. And I think that's half the issue. For me, it's retailers who lack vision will spread their SKUs everywhere and hope that any sale will be a good sale, but not more often than not, it probably isn't. So as we kind of wrap this up and we think about what might happen over the next 6 months, because many of these projects and ideas that we've got are kind of quite substantial and may in the next 6 months might just get into the C-suite as an idea to move forward. What would we think in general, because there's lots of categories and whatever, what would be our prescription for how prices will move over the next, say, 6 months?
I can start, and I'll be very specific to the food industry. I think, we haven't talked about the big elephant in the room when it comes to the food industry, and it's consumer trust. I think we all know that grocers have been heavily targeted and accused several times. They've been accused of gouging, profiteering. Every time a company actually publishes financial results, there's always accusations. So consumer trust is I think a key factor moving forward, and that will absolutely force grocers to be extremely careful when it comes to pricing. But the one thing that I'm noticing way more, and I suspect that you guys, since you buy food as well, I think the biggest battleground over the next 6 to 12 months is going to be loyalty and loyalty programs. I actually do think that now, so Sobeys just dumped Air Miles. It went with Scene. Metro just launched a couple of weeks ago, Moi, which is an in-house loyalty program. PC Optimum is the benchmark for the industry as far as I'm concerned. So they're catching up, but I actually do think that more and more, and of course, you may have heard many grocers are now just offering deals to members, people who are part of their loyalty program. And so I think that loyalty is going to be the key here to provide some savings and keep customers coming back to their stores as much as possible. But they're going to have to overcome this consumer trust challenge that they're facing. It's unprecedented. I've been following the industry for 25 years. I've never seen this. People are absolutely irrational. You can actually show numbers, show the data, and people they either believe that there's profiteering going on or they don't. And that's a tough environment to work in for grocers.
I think it's going to be an interesting next 6 months because, we've kind of talked about how the economy might formally soften. We might see the actual R word, whether it's the R word or whether it's sort of a setback. So I think back to school will be interesting, at least on the hardline side and the soft goods side. Back to school will be an interesting barometer over the next few weeks in terms of how retailers come out with pricing. I suspect there's going to be some pretty decent promotions. But, to Sylvain's point, no one wants to give away their margin either. So they're focusing more on loyalty, on members, creating memberships, tiered memberships, and also, buy more, save more type approaches. But I think you'll probably see some sharp prices, at least on select items, traffic drivers, to get people in over the next few months, particularly through the fall. We'll just have to see how the economy rolls. But I got to think the Canadian consumer is at the wall. Their debts are at an all-time high and interest rates going up. So I think it'll be a really tough environment in terms of retail. There'll be pockets, obviously luxury just keeps chugging along. But that mid-price point, there's usually less promotions at the low end, like the Dollaramas. They really don't do promotions. But the mid-tier retailers is going to find it tough probably, and they're going to have to do probably more promotions than the last few years, I would imagine.
I have a few things to add here because you just jogged my memory, Bruce. I think we're definitely going to see increased markdown and promotional activity. There's a lot of excess inventory out there that we know has to move. We're also going to start seeing, outside of updating of technology, I know that there's a lot of brands in Canada right now that are updating their tech stack in terms of their PLM system, their planning tools, anything they're using to leverage insights, these types of tools. So we are going to see just, I don't want to call it a more robust tech stack, but I will say that it will be smarter. What I'm also seeing is that brands realize that their assortments are too big and they are being called out for overbuying and overproduction. And with sustainability as a huge word right now that we can probably just talk about that all day, I think that we are starting to see brands really taking the step towards just a better way to go to market with less product because they are being called out. And then I'll also say that in terms of luxury, yes, we are seeing luxury kind of ahead of the game, as they always have been. I find that, the luxury customer, there's also the aspirational customer, and then, the Henrys, I think they call them. And then there's also the customer that is buying into resale luxury. So we're seeing an increase in that space just from a luxury standpoint, but also the resale world is driving a lot of revenue and foot traffic right now. And then we're seeing the opposite thing happen in the dollar stores and in the off-price market. These are markets that are continuing to trend with very attractive price points. And of course, they have inventory similar to what we're finding at a grocery store, right? And also that we're seeing, across these other department stores that can't seem to get it right just yet. They're working on it. I know they are. But, just focusing on what the consumer actually wants, this is where retailers need to understand better what's happening in the marketplace, but also from a pricing perspective, Gary, just bringing that back and using tools to price competitively, because it's almost like we're losing sight of, okay, this is what's happening in the state of the economy, this is what's happening with housing prices, this is all affecting what kind of disposable income that people actually have and what price they're actually willing to pay for product.
There's quite a few complexities in trying to imagine if we're a retailer, it does depend on how much excess stock we have, because nobody's actually declaring that we've got a whole bundle of it. All we know is that warehouse and occupation through retailers stormed up, and I think there's something like less than 2% of space is available to the open market. So we know there's a latent and, dare I say, big problem. And how does that manifest itself in forward pricing as we move into peak? And it's at this time many of the plans to build for peak are already in place, and many retailers that we might choose to speak to may actually say, what do you expect us to do? Because we can't go back to last year or the year before or the year before and go, oh, we just do that again plus 5%. We're in a very different world, and there's a huge amount of risks about buying the wrong stock or buying the wrong quantity of the right stock. But I think that Lisa, Bruce and Sylvain have all kind of got this fragment together. It's understanding what the customer really needs and making sure that our assortment and our supply chain that supports that are all geared together with the help of technology to actually land this and land a profit and drive loyalty through value being delivered to consumers in wherever that might be, whether it's at the porch or at the shelf. But I think that there's a lot still to go for the average retailer to actually show a good result during this period. I think that there are many risks on their underlying profitability, and we may still find that as we go through this peak, the things that perhaps other people, including me, said, well, that should have happened by now, i.e. a number of fallouts from the industry, may actually manifest themselves. So on that really positive note, I'd like to thank Bruce, Sylvain and Lisa for contributing to this conversation. Thank you everybody for listening, watching, and look forward to the next conversation, and make sure you join us. Thank you. Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your organization. You can connect with me via my website, RetailAID.ca, go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn and connect with me there. Please feel free to follow the experts on this podcast for more insights and to join in the conversation. I look forward to collaborating with you and playing an active part with your supply chain and business's transformation as you are inspired to think big, be bold, scale, adapt, and win.